You will be over your ex before your trauma is. Let me explain. This is often where you're at that point in your breakup recovery journey where you hit that friction point that's often driven by cognitive dissonance. This is where you have a lot of frustration because you've got conflicting thoughts and feelings, head versus heart, disgust versus desire, present healing versus past trauma. And not only do you feel immense frustration, and you can almost punish yourself for not being further ahead in your healing journey as what you want to be, but if you're unable to reconcile the cognitive dissonance that's at play, you also run the risk of falling into a trauma loop and not being able to fully process and move past the breakup. So if you're at this point, you're often in that place of, I know this person or the relationship was not good for me. And if I was back there right now, it would be detrimental to my mental health, my spiritual health, hell, even my physical health. So I don't want to be back there, but I feel like I can't move past that. And I still, in a way, want them back. So if you've experienced this or you're currently experiencing this, I get it, it's frustrating. So why are you still feeling stuck? Long story short, attachment, trauma, and if you've got all of the ingredients for this shit cake, attachment trauma. And this is where understanding what cognitive dissonance is and how to reconcile it becomes so important for your healing journey. So in this episode of the Reconnection Co podcast, I'm hopefully going to give you some insights that can help you understand why some relationships and breakups can be so immensely traumatic, because they can tear open deeper, more long-standing wounds, especially for those of us that may have a history of trauma, C-PTSD, high ACE scores, and attachment injuries. So think of your insecure attachment styles, anxious, avoidant. And oftentimes these result from a myriad of childhood experiences that often have varying flavors of trauma. And I also want to help you understand how these past trauma histories can help give you the rosiest of rose-colored glasses when you are looking back on this person that may have caused immense emotional harm to you. And oftentimes your longing is more a trauma-driven response and a little bit of a neurochemical withdrawal. So think dopamine in this sense. And how unfinished business, oftentimes from previous traumatic experiences, can often throw a spanner in the works when it comes to your healing journey through this breakup. Now, this is one of the things I very much want to talk about, and it's the role that cognitive dissonance plays and that friction point that I mentioned earlier, where you've got that little bit of friction between head versus heart and your current healing versus your past trauma, and how this can keep you essentially stuck on someone that you know isn't good for you on some level. And this ties into some of the neurobiology of trauma bonding. And hopefully you're going to leave with a little bit more of an understanding and be able to potentially identify and recognize that your longing for this person may not necessarily be because of them. Oftentimes you may be searching for resolution, repair, and emotional safety for deeper, more long-standing trauma wounds that the relationship in this person has just dug up and reactivated. So oftentimes we're searching for the healing of this unfinished business that's not necessarily that person. They're just the person who is most present in mind that we are searching for to help heal this wound. And this is one of the things that make it very apparent is if you've had this similar breakup experience or these feelings off the back of a breakup time and time again. Oftentimes it is unfinished business for something else that isn't this person that is at play. And it can be very difficult for us to break that cycle. But once you're able to identify if it's present and then seek the help of a mental health professional to help you pass through this and process it and move past it, it makes the breakup experience, it's never enjoyable, but it makes it a lot easier to reconcile and take steps moving forward and hopefully break that cycle of rumination and just where you're punishing yourself as far as why didn't this person choose me? So hopefully you're going to leave this episode with a little bit more self-empowerment, some validation and clarity as far as where you may be in your healing journey and what you may need to do directionally when it comes to speaking to a mental health professional, or when I say directionally, what direction you may take with a mental health professional to try and break that cycle. Welcome back to the Reconnection Co, where healing starts with reconnection. As always, despite the fact that I am a registered health practitioner, I am not a mental health practitioner yet. I am undertaking accredited training in mental health and counselling. Irrespective of this, none of the information that I share across any of the Reconnection Co platforms is designed to be taken as mental health advice. I am sharing insights and experience and a little bit of evidence to try and help you make sense of what is happening in your emotional world, give you a sense of validation, and hopefully guide you towards some deeper work and inner healing. Now, as I mentioned in the intro, we are tackling the cognitive dissonance that exists when we hit that friction point between head versus heart, disgust versus desire, present healing versus past trauma, and why you will often find that you will be over your ex before your trauma is. Now, a large amount of the topics that we are discussing within this episode can be applied to those people who may not have attachment trauma or histories of trauma. Just because someone doesn't have a history of trauma does not mean they are immune from, unfortunately, having many of these breakup experiences with our avoidants. However, we just know that statistically, those with a trauma history or attachment injuries are more likely to experience these. Now, before we dive into the breakup stages or brain chemistry, we need to talk about what was already there, the trauma that existed before your ex ever showed up. So if you grew up with emotionally unavailable or neglectful caregivers, if you felt or you essentially were conditioned in having to earn love by being helpful, easygoing, or high achieving, or you were made to feel like your emotions were too much and essentially an inconvenience, and essentially feeling like you were invisible or fundamentally unlovable, then you probably learnt that love was conditional, that being seen meant performing, that emotional closeness wasn't safe, it was temporary. Now, enter someone with an avoidant attachment style, someone who is really good at performing closeness in the beginning. The love bombing, the future faking, them saying all of the right things. And for the first time in forever, you feel seen, you feel chosen, and your body just does this existential sigh of relief. This is it. This is the safety I have been waiting for. But you likely don't know at this point that it's not real safety. It's a performance. Hell, even the avoidant may not know it's performance either. But there are early signs that we can often miss, downplay, or just blatantly ignore. Either way, when the mask slips, when they pull away, when they disappear, or when they discard you, it doesn't just hurt, it can reopen all of those earlier wounds, which is why some of these breakups, especially for those that have a history of trauma, can be so devastating and dysregulating. And this can be why your nervous system gets stuck, because you're not just grieving them, you're grieving the younger you who thought this was finally going to be different. So here's one of the hardest truths to swallow. When you're stuck on them, you're not just missing them, you're missing what they represented. You're missing the feeling of finally being seen, the illusion that someone was going to love you right, the fantasy that this relationship would fix what others had broken. But that fantasy is often built on a wound, and when they leave, you feel like that wound is your fault again, but it's not. They may have caused a new wound and reopened existing ones. They may have poured salt in them, but the version of them that created these wounds cannot heal them. And the version of you who your wounded self wants them to go back and be, the rose-coloured glasses version of them, they can't fix it either, because unless they've done some serious soul searching, a lot of gritty and deep inner work, and really unpacked why they are who they are and why they do what they do, and frankly acknowledge what they did to you, they cannot be the ones to heal it. It's not fair, you did not ask for it, you did not deserve it, and unfortunately it has now become your job to heal it. So how do you know if this breakup has reopened old wounds and not just hurt you in the present? Some signs. It might be the intensity of your pain seems disproportionate to what transpired in the relationship, because there can even be some instances where you may not be that into this person, but then when they decide to end things with you, you are utterly devastated. And oftentimes, one of the other biggest signals is if you've had relationship breakups like this before and experienced similar emotional intensity as a result. And another sign that you might be experiencing a reopened wound is, whilst you're not just grieving the person, you're often feeling abandoned, invisible, erased. Now, in some of the very extreme cases of avoidant discards, there is that abandonment that happens. You are made to feel invisible, and some of them can engage in a lot of erasure, where they essentially try to scrub you clean from their social circles, from their social media. Any trace that you even existed in their world is scrubbed and erased. Now, sometimes they actually do that, and that is when it falls into the realm of emotional abuse. Now, in the absence of this, or it can be in the presence of this, if you are feeling that you feel abandoned, invisible, and erased, irrespective of if they have enacted this or not, these are some signs that the wound may be touching on some childhood or earlier experiences of you being of you feeling unseen, unheard, or emotionally neglected. And another thing that is a really big sign is, off the back of a breakup, you feel like your entire sense of self is collapsing. So the breakup doesn't just feel like a loss, it feels like a rejection of you at your most core level. And your internal narrative can actually sound a lot younger than your actual age. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I good enough? Please come back. Why have they left me? Why can't they come back? These aren't just adult statements, they're echoes of an inner child's unmet needs. And when this happens, it is very crucial to realize that the pain isn't often about them leaving, or it partly is them leaving, but it's not just about them leaving. It's about what their leaving reminds you of and what it's reawakened in your nervous system. So remember, a number of these aren't just breakup questions, they are often inner child questions. Because if you've ever had a caregiver who was inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, or neglectful, this breakup isn't just now, it's then all over again. It reactivates the younger version of you who asked, why won't they come when I'm crying? Why won't they comfort me when I'm upset? Why do I have to suppress myself and be so easy and quiet to be loved? What did I do wrong to make them leave me? Your ex didn't create those wounds, but the way they exited your life may have mirrored the very wounds that you have spent a lifetime trying to survive. Because here's what avoidants often do. They will often give you a false sense of security and then disappear. They will say they've never felt this way before and then ghost you. They will often talk about and even engage in building a future with you and then withdraw without any warning and then replace you without any explanation. Now with this, it creates a trauma echo. The breakup becomes more than a loss, it becomes an erasure of identity. And when it has happened time and time again, it becomes a repetition of trauma. And your nervous system doesn't know that it's a different person. All it knows is someone I love just left me without explanation again. Someone I trusted just withdrew their love without warning again. Someone who once made me feel safe and they're now the source of my abandonment again. So it's not just heartbreak, it is a re-injury of a core attachment wound. Now, if you have these older wounds and trauma histories, but remember, it's not an exclusive breakup purgatory reserved only for those with attachment trauma, many who prior to this experience had no relational trauma can also land themselves here. You may get stuck in the first stage of the breakup, grief and denial. Why? Because anger and disgust, which is the next stage that you'll move into, they require emotional distance. But when your trauma is behind the wheel of your emotional processing, it doesn't want distance, it wants resolution. Your wounded parts believe things like, if I just understand what happened, I can make it right. If they just explain and give me closure, I'll feel okay. If I can stay soft and loving, they might come back as the good version of them again. But here's the thing. You can't reach the clarity of disgust if you are still in grief and denial. And you can't reach and embrace self-protection, also known as boundaries, if you're still waiting for them to protect or heal you. And this is where and why so many people get stuck. Not because you're not trying, but because we often don't realize that we're potentially grieving unfinished business from another point in time, from another person, often in childhood and often caregivers, in whatever capacity that presentation may be. So it's not just the breakup you can be struggling with, you can be struggling with revisiting, processing, and regulating yourself through these reopened wounds. And this is why it can be so hard to let go, and why I say that oftentimes you will be over your ex before your trauma is, because you may be at a point where if they were standing in front of you asking to get back together, you would hesitate. That hesitation is the part of you that is healing, that is recognizing the harm that they caused and the further harm they could potentially cause if you let them back in. But it will quickly come up against the part of you that seeks relief. Relief from the breakup trauma and possibly the relief and healing of the unfinished business that existed prior to when they wrecking balled themselves into your psyche. And your inner child may still be waiting for the kind version of them to return, not because you think that they're your soulmate, but because you need the story to end differently this time. You need the good parent version of them to come back and say, "I'm sorry I hurt you. You didn't do anything wrong. This was me. I see you. I never should have left that way." But unfortunately, here is the brutal truth. They likely won't. Not because you're not worth it, that's not true at all, but it's often because they do not have the capacity to get there. Now remember, avoidants aren't just unavailable to you, they're unavailable to themselves. And whilst your nervous system may still long for repair, your healing actually begins with some truths that you may need to tell yourself. Things like, they gave me a false sense of emotional safety. They activated my deepest wounds and then left me to bleed. And that has nothing to do with my worth and everything to do with their avoidance. And also in showing me that there's some unhealed parts of myself that I need to love and work on too. And cognitive dissonance is that uncomfortable, torturous gap that begins to arrive when you start to move between the thought process and recognition that they were so loving and good to me, but they also ghosted me, lied to me, and treated me like I didn't matter. Now, our brains hate contradiction, so it tries to choose one. You'll either look to villainize them completely or put them back on the pedestal, but neither works because both truths exist. And this is cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is where you hold two opposing thoughts or beliefs. So with this example, or in this context, the good often wasn't a lie, but the harm was real. Like, avoidants often mean what they say in the moment, but when real intimacy shows up or real vulnerability is required, their shame and fear take over. That does not make in any way, shape or form the harm that they enact okay. It does, however, make it predictable if you understand the pattern. Your trauma will want to fix it, to close the loop, to make the good version of them come back and undo the pain. But healing means accepting and seeing the full picture. They are both the person who showed up sweetly and the person who couldn't stay. And as you move through the stages of an avoidant breakup, you'll often oscillate between grief and anger. And this is where the cognitive dissonance really begins to rear its head. The grieving, wounded parts of you look at all the good. The hurt, angry, rage-filled part of you looks at all the bad. And as with everything, the truth of who they are lies somewhere in between. Now, let's walk through the stages many people go through in these avoidant breakups and how trauma can twist or slow down that process. And just a side note, remember, not everyone with a trauma history will experience this or get stuck in these loops. Much the same as not everyone without a trauma history or pre-existing attachment wounds are immune from these breakup experiences. it can hit us all. Statistically though, it just seems to hit more and hit harder in those of us with a trauma history, C-PTSD, or attachment wounds. So stage 1 is grief, and this can often be sprinkled in with a little bit of denial, and this is often right off the back of the rupture in the relationship, and you are left with just the thoughts of what the hell just happened. And a lot of the questions that tend to come to mind when you're in this state is trying to make sense of it. How could they do this? Was this even real? What happened? What did I do wrong? You will often feel confusion, desperation, and just utter heartbreak. Your reality has just been obliterated. So you're not just grieving the person, you're grieving the future that you imagined, especially if some of our avoidants, who can be very good at future faking, if they built that fantasy with you. Now, if there was a lot of love bombing or intensity, which if trauma bonding actually is where your relationship ended up in, there's highly likely that love bombing was part of the equation. If you have hit this, you'll be left feeling confusion, desperation, and just utter heartbreak. You're not just grieving the person, you are grieving the future that you imagined that is now being completely obliterated, and especially the future fantasy that they built with you. Because if there was love bombing and intensity, which so many of our avoidants are fantastic at, future faking often came into the equation as well. So you've got the love bombing, you've got the intensity, you've got the future faking. And then off the back of this, you also have the neurochemical withdrawals. Dopamine has just been ripped out of the equation. So this is where you can just be stuck in that inner wounded child state of what did I do wrong? How can I fix it? You're dysregulated as hell and you are seeking relief. And we will often try to seek this relief from our ex-partner because they have been for so long, potentially so long, our source of regulation or a source of regulation. And if I could only just get them back, they can make this feeling go away. Very much a withdrawal sensation. So if you move through the grief stage, you will often then come up against or move into the anger or the rage phase. And this is where you start to see the harm and anger kicks in. And you land at a little bit of like, how fucking dare they think that they are entitled to treat me this way? Who the hell does this to someone that they claimed that they loved? And this is where rage journaling, who Ken Reed, a counsellor that I know, he advocates for it considerably. And I must agree, rage journaling is amazing. It becomes trauma healing gold. Now, when you hit the rage phase or the anger phase, you may feel disgust towards this person because there's some of those little moral and ethical elements that come up where you are just so completely shocked that someone could actually do this to another human being. And then you will often feel disgust, not just towards them for their behavior, but heartbreakingly, sometimes you can feel this disgust towards yourself, especially if you've got a trauma history that is steeped in self-blame. This is often where it will resurface. And please do not punish yourself here. This is your trauma talking. And often with that disgust that we turn inwards, it's how could I let myself fall into this situation? How could I let someone treat me like this? How could I have not seen the signs? There are so many of these, like, it's almost victim blaming where you're just thinking like, how the hell did I let myself get here? You didn't know. Unfortunately, you didn't know. And whilst it is good in a sense that you will now be acutely aware of when these patterns will be rearing their head again, if you go on to date avoidance again in the future, you will be acutely aware of this, so you'll be easier able to identify it. However, staying in this self-blame is not going to do yourself any favours. Now, this is where cognitive dissonance really starts to increase its friction Because when you're in grief or the denial phase, this is where your inner wounded child, or just your wounded self in general, is looking at them through rose-colored glasses. You are yearning for that kind, caring, loving person that you fell in love with to come back and heal the hurt that they caused. But then you also are battling internally in your mind with reconciling that the person that I loved is also this complete Jekyll and Hyde who has just obliterated my sense of emotional safety, who has ejected me from our world. And it's just very hard to reconcile the two. If you are able to reach the next phase, so you're able to reconcile that cognitive dissonance, this is where you'll often hit that level of and it's not this like come to Jesus moment, but you'll hit a bit of acceptance and clarity, and you'll often stop asking why and start understanding how they were capable of doing what they did. Doesn't excuse it, but you understand it, and you're able to sort of remove yourself from you needing them to come back and fix what they broke. So you start to look at things a little bit further removed. It's almost like you look at things like, wow, they were so emotionally shut down that they couldn't even tolerate having a vulnerable conversation with me when I had created or tried to create and foster this really healthy open line of communication between us. And you'll also often reach thoughts and feelings like, how sad is it that their fear or shame was stronger than them treating me with any love, respect, or dignity. You still might feel grief, but it's now sort of grief for the entire situation and kind of a little bit of sadness, and it can broach into a little bit of pity for seeing how wounded that they are and how they were able to cause such immense emotional harm for those around them. And so the grief is moving away from being grieving for them, and it's more just grief for the whole situation and feeling sad about the whole situation, but you're moving towards grief for that, but you're not longing for them. So cognitive dissonance isn't a problem unless you refuse to work through it. So cognitive dissonance, it's not bad. In fact, it's actually a sign that your brain is trying to make sense of a contradiction. It's able to identify that there are two opposing things at play, and that in itself is healthy. It only becomes damaging when you can't reconcile and progress through either the grief or the anger phases. So remember, the grief and the wounded child will often idealize them, focusing on the amazing person that they were at the beginning. The angry, hurt part of you will often focus on all of the bad parts that you saw, the harm. You may have a few revenge fantasies, long to call or message them to give them a piece of your mind. Grief and anger are essential for identifying boundaries and enacting or allowing us to grow and be a little bit more self-protective. So it is essential and it is important so long as we don't get stuck here. And if you do find after a time that you are stuck in either phase, that is the grief phase or the anger phase, it may be worth seeking some help from a therapist or counsellor, because you can lose so much of your time and so much of yourself feeding into the hurt parts of you. So when you're able to face the dissonance, you'll often say and land at a point where it's like, both versions of them are true and who they are. And at this point in time, it is likely who they still are. And I can't have one without the other. They were kind and giving. And they also lied and manipulated. They said they loved me, and they likely did in the capacity that they had, but they also abruptly removed me from their life. They dismissed me expressing my hurt and just labeled it as an inconvenience to them. They showed me no empathy, compassion, or humility in the entire breakup process. Their fear, their wounds, their avoidance of discomfort mattered more than sitting with the discomfort of having a conversation with me. It mattered more than treating me with dignity. The good that I experienced with them, it wasn't a lie, but the harm they enacted was real. The connection we had was real, but the erasure I experienced at their hand was also real. So when you reconcile the cognitive dissonance, something powerful begins to happen. You stop waiting for closure from them. You stop needing to rewrite the story. You stop longing for them to heal the unfinished business that was either caused from them and or reopened by them. So you still 100% deserve the apology. You 100% deserve the acknowledgement and the validation of your experience. But you will land at a point where you realize that choosing to protect your own peace is more important than waiting to be seen by someone who honestly can't even see themselves. And this is where cognitive congruence begins, when your beliefs, values, and lived experiences finally align. And this is where you will have the anger part of you and the part of you that is hurt and knows that you deserve better and does not want this person back. You will often land at that point before the healing part of you that is often working through many of the unhealed parts of us, the childhood trauma. You will land at being over your ex before you likely land at healing those other elements of you. So this is why you will be over your ex before your trauma is. And I know it's not easy. It hurts phenomenally, but it is a path, and there is a path out of the trauma loop and back into self-trust. Now, giving you a few tips and strategies on how to work through this, I felt a little bit conflicted on whether I could or should with this episode because, again, I'm not giving this as mental health advice. I am sharing this for some insights, sharing my experiences and just my understanding of how these processes unfold. And I feel like compared to other episodes where I do share a few tips and strategies, this is one that if you are stuck in this part of cognitive dissonance and you're not able to reconcile that, again, I'm not diagnosing anyone, but there may be a few deeper things at play that are far outside of the scope that someone on the internet can just give you random advice or instruction on. So if you find that you are stuck in this friction point of cognitive dissonance and you're not able to reconcile the two parts of your ex and you're not able to move forward through the breakup recovery journey and you are somewhat stuck, I would highly recommend reaching out to a mental health professional, a counsellor, someone to help unpack and help guide your process through this. Now, in saying that, I will have the guided journaling session that accompanies this episode available on the YouTube playlist. Now, again, it's more so to give you a little bit of instruction and tools on some self-reflection in this realm. It's not, again, to sort of diagnose anyone or make any sort of informed treatment decisions or anything like that. It's a little bit of a self-reflective exercise that may help you when you actually reach out to a mental health professional who can hopefully help you progress through your journey. So I just want to wrap this up by reminding you that if you feel stuck in longing, confusion, or emotional exhaustion, you are not weak, you are not broken, and you are not crazy for missing someone who hurt you. You are likely carrying, in some way, shape, or form, some unfinished business. The emotional stories that started often long before this person entered your life. And the goal with this is to not demonize your ex, even though at times some of them very much fucking deserve it. But the goal of this is to reclaim your narrative. They were part of the story, but they do not get to write the ending. You are reclaiming your power. Your trauma may still long for closure. You may still want them back to help repair that. Your nervous system may still be craving the safety that they promised, but they never delivered. But your healing, your reconnection begins when you stop reaching back for someone who already let go. The good was real, but the harm was too. And now it's your turn to choose you, to stop the loop, to become the safe place you've always needed. Take care, and I'll see you next time. If you find that this episode or any of the content that I share across the Reconnection Co platforms resonates, please, the best thing that you can do to help the platform and the channel grow is to like and subscribe. And if you know anyone who may benefit from this content, please share it with them. And as always, there will be the guided journaling session that accompanies this podcast episode available on the guided journaling session playlist available on YouTube.